Welcome, everybody, to the Code of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andy Roark. Guys, I got a great one for you. I am here with my friend, Dr. Matt MacLachlan. Matt is an economist. He is at Cornell. He is a really, really sharp guy. And I ask him the question that I keep rolling around is, Matt, we got all these vet schools that are coming into the profession. Do we really need more veterinarians? If we get more veterinarians, does that actually mean that we're going to have veterinarians in the underserved places that veterinarians don't currently want to go to? Is that how that works? And he's got really good answers. I love this conversation that Matt is a very smart guy. He is very insightful. He gives a lot of thought to his answers, and he has some really great explanations, and he explains how he looks at things. And there's so many moving parts and so many variables, and it's hard to have a lot of clarity. I think he really lays out kind of what he's looking at and what he's thinking about really nicely. So if you're interested in really thinking about what the vet profession is going to look like in 10 years from now, this episode is for you. Let's get into it.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. Andy Roark.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Matt MacLachlan. How are you, my friend?
Good. How are you doing, Andy?
Man, I'm doing great. I am really glad to be able to sit down with you. You are someone I've been looking forward to interviewing. For those who do not know, you used to be a research economist with the USDA, and now, since 2023, I think you have been an assistant professor of veterinary business and economics with the College of Veterinary Medicine and the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell. That is a mouthful.
Yeah. Comes with a lot of jobs too.
Yeah. So we were talking before we started. So you're working over in the economics and management school and then back in the vet school, and you've got postdocs coming in, and you're just doing a lot of things and sort of meshing these sort of two worlds together. And so anyway, I am excited to talk to you, and I've been looking forward to this because, Matt, there's a lot of discussion in vet medicine about the need, quote unquote, like quotes around need, the need for more veterinarians. And I kind of see it and I kind of don't. And so I'm looking at, there's a lot of schools opening up. We've got about 15 veterinary schools in the pipeline. When, for most of my career, we had about 30 schools total in the U.S., not including the Caribbean schools. And so adding 15 is a huge increase in capacity. And I see people saying, oh, wow, the vets are really busy. But Matt, I don't know about that. And so I've got some questions about, do we really need 50% more veterinarians to be produced? And maybe more than that, because a lot of the new schools are talking about putting out classes that are much larger than what the traditional schools have put out and things like that. And so I really don't know how to feel on this. And I'm coming with the honest inquiry here. Do we need more veterinarians? And so let me start to ask you this. Can you go ahead and give me the case that's being made for having more veterinarians?
Yeah, I think the case for having more veterinarians came on the heels of COVID-19. We had a very large expansion in terms of pet ownership and people taking their animals to the vets. Overall, we just had a bump in consumer demand for veterinary services. And what I mean by this is for their pets and household animals, not for large animals like cows, chickens, pigs, that sort of thing. So there was a huge bump in demand for clinical veterinarians or folks who will see your pets. Okay. And folks couldn't necessarily get the services they wanted, and they were facing a much higher price than they'd seen in the past for their veterinary care. This starts to make a case for, hey, maybe there are too few veterinarians, maybe too much pressure is being placed on the veterinarians who are working. Maybe if we employ more veterinarians, we could have the veterinarians working shorter hours, have consumers paying lower prices. And in addition to that, there's a whole bunch of other conversations that are being had around food animals in rural America. And this is a related but somewhat distinct conversation, because we might, even if we have enough veterinarians graduating, a very low proportion of them are going to these underserved communities. Right. And that's its own challenge. And what's unclear, at least to me at this point, is if you simply graduate more veterinarians, will they enter those underserved markets or not? And that connection hasn't I think, been made in a very compelling way quite yet. But that could be a strong case for graduating more veterinarians over time.
Okay. So when we look at this, the big sort of the case that I guess that I've seen is as you mentioned, the growing pet population was a big one. And then a need in public health and food safely. And then you didn't mention you said widespread burnout. Matt, what's your impression of sort of sustainability in this career? Do we have a production problem or do we have a retention problem? Or do you take either one?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could make a case for either one. I think making sure that burnout rates are reduced has been the subject of dozens of papers starting from before I started at Cornell. So I didn't necessarily think I had a ton to add to the conversation because it had been so well studied. And it was very compelling that you had somewhere around 20% of veterinarians identifying themselves as potentially wanting to shift careers at this point or drop out of the workforce entirely. That signals a strong problem in terms of where veterinarians are at. So that's significant. If you lose 20% of your workforce, no matter how many folks you're training, you'll probably need to increase that. So if you want to increase the veterinarians being trained for some of these areas where we have shortages of veterinarians, I think, first and foremost, you want to make sure that those folks do the 4+ years of training and then stay in the positions or at least in the field. I think if you don't address that burnout problem first, training's not necessarily going to solve the problem either.
Do you have the numbers off the top of your head? Like what are most industries sort of at when you ask them and say, what percentage of people are considering leaving the profession? I don't know what's normal. Like this is all that I know. Is it 5%? Is it 1%?
No, it's a great question. I can't say I know that one off the top of my head, but 20% I don't think would be the norm. But yeah, it could be relatively high right now. We are going through a period, I think, where workers are staying put and job satisfaction might be low in the general population as well. So yeah, I think considering those differences is really important. Yeah, if you look like every other industry, it might not be a veterinary specific problem. It could be societal or a larger issue rather than just the veterinarians having an especially tough time.
Yeah, no, I'm always interested in how special are the vets, and I mean that in a loving way. It's like I don't know if you interviewed middle school teachers right now, and the school year is just getting started. It's got to be 20% are looking for something else. They're like, what have I done? Why am I here again? But I don't know. I was just curious if you could say confidently.
I can't say confidently. I'm guessing it's higher than the average, but yeah, I'd have to look that up. My wife did leave the middle school system.
There you go.
About 2 years ago, too. So, yeah, that one's, I think, a particularly tough industry as well.
Oh, yeah. It's particular. Yeah, the kids are going back to school around my house right now. And so this is top of mind for me. Well, so, Matt, go ahead and give me the case against producing more veterinarians. What are kind of the red flags here around just saying, hey, let's just make more?
Yeah, I think, to my mind, some of the big problems that I see are if you're training veterinarians and they are not tracking into those jobs where you have identified need for additional veterinarians, you're not necessarily taking the best approach to solve the problem at hand. More broadly, if you have more veterinarians, the overall wage for veterinarians is likely to go down. If you have more people in the workforce, typically those folks get paid less. They're simply less scarce. We already have some challenges with veterinarians paying off substantial loans in this space. And I think we do need to be sensitive to the wage impacts that increasing class sizes could bring. Do I know what that's going to be off of a 50% increase? We don't see that in a lot of other sectors, and we haven't seen it in the recent past in the veterinary labor market. So it's very difficult to guess how big of a wage impact this could have, but my guess is there will be some in the medium to long run.
So, Matt, I buy into kind of what you're saying. I was looking at it the same way. I understand that there's definitely shortages of vets. It really, there's sort of two ways that I look at it, right? One of them is urban versus rural. And I go, well, people say there's not enough vets, they're underserved. And I go, well, if you walk around downtown Greenville, South Carolina, which is a booming small town going towards a medium town, there's plenty of vets. Like there's vets all over the place. And if you drive, an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of Greenville into rural South Carolina, there is not a lot of vets. And those are just very different experiences. So one is sort of, underserved areas versus well-served areas. And the other is the type of medicine that we're practicing. I interviewed Dr. Steve Marks, who's the dean at Clemson, a while ago. But I didn't say on the podcast, I had met him the first time I met him. I talked to him about the school, and I said, what are your goals for the school? And he said, Andy, we've got to get large animal students in here. That's what we want. We want equine. We want large animal. And I said, do you think that's going to be hard? And he said, yes, everybody wants to do what you do. And it was very much around this, a big desire for people to be in companion animals. And so the other part really is the type. It's food safety, it's public health, it's things like that. And so my big question for you, Matt, is there any precedent in another industry where you pour in more workers and they filter over into these underserved areas? I don't know if that makes any sense, but can you just add enough vets that they're going to go to rural South Carolina or become food animal vets? Is that a possibility of just feeding people into the system? I don't have an answer. Is there any other industry that you can think of that has tried something like that?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. Typically what we think about is providing financial or other incentives for folks to take on these roles that maybe aren't being taken up elsewhere. We were in a discussion actually yesterday where they were talking about in human medicine, they provide financial incentives to doctors who work in rural Alaska. This is an area that, again, it's going to have a small client base, but those folks do need medical care. So it's really important that they have someone available. But the market isn't necessarily going to offer them a doctor. The pay rate for very small communities and infrequent visits might be too low. So the government steps in and provides subsidies there. So where I've seen corrections made isn't, I think, through let's say a fire hose type approach where you just, pour more labor into the market and hope for the best, but usually more targeting what your actual objective is. And if it's to get folks in these communities, I think providing some carrots to do that would probably be more effective.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I also have the thought about sort of classic supply and demand, right? If you keep adding vets, I don't think the economics of vet medicine are good. It's an understatement. The economics of vet medicine are not good. I love that the salaries of veterinarians have come up, but the average student salary, student debt ratio is still quite high relative to other industries. We turn out people who have generally a lot of debt. And I worry about turning out doctors that are carrying large student loans, and they come out in increasing numbers, and there's just this downward pressure, one, on being able to get a job, but two, on what doctors can sort of charge for their services. So, geez, unpack that a little bit for me. What sort of concerns do you have around this, Matt? Are there ways that we could be wrong here? Are there ways that supply and demand might not work out this way, and it might be fine to increase the number of vets that we have this much?
Without getting into too much econ jargon to address that sort of question, I think, starting with the first part of debt loads to income ratios, I think AVMA put out that's approximately 1.3 in their latest report. And I think being sensitive to the fact that these folks veterinarians have to pay their bills, and they have to be financially healthy to be good veterinarians, to avoid burnout. Financial stress increases your general stress and is more likely to lead to burnout. That's a very substantial contributor. There are labor market and regular market situations where you can increase the supply and consumers don't really respond. We usually call this inelastic demand, where you just don't have a lot of sensitivity in terms of the price to the amount of services or goods being brought to the market. This can arise. My sense is in the veterinary space, folks are sensitive to prices. It's a substantial cost. People care very much about their pets and, don't take the choice as to whether or not to take their pet to the veterinarian to make it healthier and happier very lightly. They really want to do everything they can and can afford to put their pet in the best possible position. There just come situations, I think, where the price tag might be a little higher than what folks can pay, and this would decrease demand. But I think folks are not necessarily going to just ignore higher prices. And that's starting to come through. If you go to AVMA's industry tracker. This uses VetSource data. It looks like prices have been high for a while and been coming up. And now we're seeing declines in the number of visits, at least according to that VetSource data over the past year, and declining real revenues, meaning that revenues have grown more slowly than has inflation.
So I've been running a vet conference for years, so Uncharted Veterinary Conference. And when the pandemic hit, it was really hard to get a venue, right, to get a space. And now they were all shut down. And then they kind of opened back up, and there was this huge glut of people that wanted to book events, right? There was a lot of brides who had been waiting, and it was time to get married, and they wanted the Westin Ballroom, and they were willing to fight for it. And the hotels were understaffed because they had laid off a lot of people for the pandemic. And so labor was really tight, and the demand was really high, and the prices went up. And Matt, they have now largely as an industry dug out of the glut, the backlog of people trying to have events. But do you think that the cost of live events have come back down? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. They have once they figured out that people would pay this price, the price stayed there. I was talking to somebody who was getting their deck redone, and they were talking about having to get steel. They needed a steel beam for this thing. And they were lamenting the fact that during the pandemic, steel prices went up, and that made sense. But once they were up, they did not come back down. Do you think that we really are in a situation where if you increase the number of veterinarians into the system, the prices of care are actually going to come down?
Oh, deflation or prices coming down is very rare. I used to work as the USDA's food price forecaster. We did see that in food prices in 2016 and 2017. It actually raises concerns that there's an issue when prices come down. At best, what we usually see is a slowdown in price increases. So I would be surprised if prices actually can come down. That can happen. The 2008 recession, I think after that, we had some massive price slowdowns and even some decreases, but it's not a typical event. I think if I had to guess, and I don't set a single price in the industry,
yeah, sure.
But if I had to guess, I would say there's going to be a slowdown in the prices coming up. We've seen this in the general economy. We've seen that slowdown in the number of visits. So I think price increases for veterinary services are going to slow down quite a bit. But yeah, I wouldn't anticipate them coming down.
So given that we're on this path and we've got these vet schools that are coming online, and there's going to be an increased number of new veterinarians coming into the market in, let's say, 5 to 10 years. If you had to look into your crystal ball, what do you think that looks like for our industry? So let's say that I'm an associate veterinarian. I'm 10 years out in my career, and I've got 20 years left, hopefully. What do you think I'm going to see? How is my life going to change?
In the first year or two, not that much. I mean, first-year graduates represent only a sliver of the overall veterinarians. But in the second year, that sliver gets bigger. The third year of new graduates, it gets bigger, and so on and so forth. So really, with these schools opening around now or a little later, we don't necessarily expect these impacts to come in 2027. I mean, there's no new grads in the market. 2030, maybe a little bit. By the mid-2030s and by 2040, I would anticipate they would have some impact on the market. And again, I think this increases the labor supply overall. And we would definitely expect to see wage decreases of some sort. This shouldn't increase wages, I'll say that, but it does put some downward pressure on wages.
When you think about sort of work capacity and labor markets, we've also got the VPAs, the mid-level practitioners. And again, I think it's still unclear what that's going to actually be or what sort of impact that's going to actually have. But I'm looking at a couple of things. I feel like, and maybe naively, I don't think so, I feel like veterinarians are doing a better job of leveraging their technicians. I think that veterinarian medicine is becoming more of a team game. I see potential for mid-level practitioners stepping in and sort of doing some of the wellness caseload, things like that. And then on top of that, I see more doctors sort of coming in. Do you think that, are we going to damage ourselves with increased efficiency? Meaning, do you think that this is a significant contributor to concern is, well, we've now got better trained support staff. I don't want to not have better trained support staff. I think that sort of efficiency is that makes sense to me in how our profession can go. But does that add to the concern?
Yeah, and I will say that as systems become more efficient and the veterinarian is asked to do less, the demands on their time goes down. Right now, that's a good thing. We do have what looks like too few veterinarians for some of the roles we're looking at. Going back 23, 24, it's slowing down right now. If we go back a couple of years, we have some of these initiatives that are likely meant to save the veterinarian time so they can do things faster, they can focus on what they're best at. This would, beyond mid-level technicians, this would also be improved information technologies and other sorts of information systems that just make data imputation and everything a lot easier. In lean times, that might mean that your time is much more scarce. You can go back, or it's much less in demand. And then it can raise a problem. You don't have to go back that far. 2013, this was when I was still in grad school, but I've read the articles from that period. And veterinarians were very concerned that they couldn't land their first job, that they weren't getting the sort of pay rates that matched the sort of debt loads they were taking on. So we don't have to go back all that far to think about situations where any sort of tightening of the veterinary labor market can have an impact that matters. Right now, it seems like a good thing. In a few years, it will likely, I think, be something it does put a little downward pressure on wages. On the flip side, if you don't have to do some of those tasks that you're not trained to do, that aren't your specialization, that might improve your job satisfaction. So its net effect is a little bit unclear to me.
I think that makes sense. If you got to put on your rose-colored glasses and look at the future and you were like, what if this works out great? What if it really goes very well? Matt, what does that look like in your mind?
I think that comes from the consumers. I think we've seen a shift in attitudes towards pets. In my neighborhood, I've got a couple of neighbors who take their dogs around in little hand carts and treat them better than kids. And, if you have a swell of consumers that look like that and really want a lot of veterinary care in a way that we didn't see in past generations, then I think you have a sustained growth in the veterinary industry, at least for these companion animal clinics, that just hasn't been there before. That would be the rosiest outlook I think I could really imagine.
All right. That sounds good to me. I like that. Are there any words of advice that you would have to veterinarians that are looking at this, maybe they're thinking about coming into the profession, but there anything that you would encourage people to keep an eye on or to think about?
Yeah. So I graduated college in 2008, which was the height of the Great Recession, which I think had a lasting impact in terms of being comfortable with the idea that everything doesn't go to plan, that the world can kind of change around you really quickly. And sometimes things are really good. And I think, make the most of those times. And in recent years, I think we've seen the veterinary profession do extremely well, but also, consider what the downside looks like and what that might hold for you. I think it seems like it's been a very resilient, strong couple of years and things look pretty good. I think put some serious thought into what's that rose-colored glasses situation, and you put on I'm not sure what the opposite is.
Yeah, I don't know what the opposite is. Like dark, like cloudy glasses. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and just make sure you're okay with that whole range.
I like it. All right. Dr. Matt MacLachlan, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you online? Where can they keep up with your research?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Google Scholar if you're an academic. I have my own website, MatthewMacLachlan.com, and you can always just find me on Cornell's website under the faculty directory.
Outstanding. Thanks for being here, Matt. Thanks for tuning in and listening, everybody. Take care of yourselves, gang.
Thanks, Andy.
And that's what I got. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Matt for being here. Guys, I appreciate the heck out of you. If you get a chance and you like this episode, share it with your friends. Also, like, subscribe, follow, do all of the things that people on whatever medium you're watching this on that they recommend. And so hit that thumbs up on YouTube, leave a 5-star review on Apple. There's just too many, but you know it when you see it. Just thank you for supporting the show and spreading the word. That's it from me, guys. Take care. I'll talk to you later.